Paul, it's so great to see you, to have you here. How are you doing in this moment? How are you seeing this moment that we're all leaning into in sustainability?
Yeah, so I think it's a crucial moment where we are right now. There's no question about it. I remain hopeful that we have the solutions to what we need to do. You heard some of the challenges from the previous speakers, but I also think it's an absolutely crucial moment that requires the best of all of us, because we have this small window and we don't want to mess it up, to be honest. You've seen in Glasgow a real change. You've heard from people that everybody now knows what ESG stands for, and most companies are trying to say that they're doing the right thing. But the reality is it's still, we're still far removed from what is needed. You know, the situation gets close to what I would call a negative tipping point on many of these things. And the ambitions are clearly not there yet. There's a lot of talk out there. There's some who try to do things selectively as it suits them, but the change, that critical mass, is not yet happening. So why is this the most dangerous point? Everybody feels that they're doing more than they've ever done before. Mm-hmm. They'll say they're all exhausted, and rightfully so. But the scale of the issues is actually going up faster than we're providing the solutions. So in very simple terms, the gap is actually getting bigger. A wonderful article today again in from one of your writers on plastics, where many of the chemical companies are doing wonderful things to get to bioplastics or reduce or recycle, but our appetite for plastic, multiplied by COVID, is just exponential. And you see it in clothes, you see it in many of the other categories. So it's that gap that we need to close, not the celebrating the progress that we're making.
Well, what is the gap? Let's just stick to plastics for a second, because that's such a hot button issue. Yep. and has been so for well before the pandemic struck. Is the gap between, is this should be about banning plastic, or is it really about plastic waste, or what's the conversation that we're not having about plastic?
Well, what we're not having is that we are having the conversations, as most of the companies do, about improvements we make versus where we come from. So we try to optimize the current system, if I may be very simple, whilst it needs the systems change. So the conversation we don't have is the bigger systems change. And whatever it is, if it's poverty or if it's climate change or plastics in the oceans, optimizing a current system that simply is not designed anymore to deliver will only bring you so far. And I think we're at that point right now. So if you take plastic, for example, or very simple, if you believe in some form of capitalism, at least, or free market, we are at a situation that's just simply much cheaper to make a new bottle than to recycle an old bottle. We've solved that problem more or less with aluminum, so we're recycling 80–90% of the aluminum, depending on where you are. And yes, you need recycling systems or deposit schemes and all the other things, but we're achieving that. But here the economic equation is out of whack. Now, it happens to be, in my opinion, the market for the production of polymers or monomers, which are at the base of this product, if you talk about it, is fairly concentrated. So just put a tax on monomers or polymers, make the bottle more expensive, and then it becomes more interesting to recycle. So that would be a systems change. Obviously, you want to do other things. Doesn't need to come from fossil-based fuels. I think we're getting close to answers there that move us away from something we don't want anymore. Yeah. But these are the bigger, broader changes. And my point now is, and this is also why I created Imagine, is it's just impossible for CEOs to solve that by themselves when it gets to these bigger issues.
So you've mentioned systems change maybe 3 times in the past couple of minutes, and that's a critical concept here that most of us don't have, maybe understand, number one, and number two, have the luxury of leaning into. How do you counsel this audience, the sustainable professional community, in bringing systems change to what is inherently a component-based world?
Yes, it is, absolutely. And it depends, obviously, where you sit in your organization, what you can do about that. But events like this, organizations like the UN Global Compact, industry associations, groups of CEOs that get together like we do with with Imagine, if you want to. What you see there is, besides that you learn from each other, you become collectively more courageous. And you start to look at solutions across a value chain, for example. Let's give the example of 80 CEOs we brought together in fashion, which is about 25% of the fashion industry across the value chain. Critical mass for systems change depends on what you want to do, but it's about 20%, 15, 20%. If you get that together from an industry, you can drive systems change. So with these CEOs, which many of them are small companies, they cannot really get to economically efficient green energy. They decide collectively to buy green energy. They don't really know how to internalize science-based targets for nature. Collectively, we're working now with Conservation International to put that into these companies, and actually they're quite advanced. None of these companies alone can go to regenerative cotton. You'd agree with me, that's probably one of the most destructive crops that we have in this world, but collectively you can make that. The benefit of collective is that you get out of this prisoner's dilemma, that you get scale right away so that the cost equations often don't become a bottleneck. And but where it starts in all these things is not actually in technology, or it starts in willpower. Are we willing to work together on on issues of common interest? And I keep saying increasingly we need to move this area of pre-competitiveness to a bigger space than what it is right now. We should not compete on the future of humanity. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, well, I don't think you get a lot of argument on that from this audience, but I wonder, it seems that a prerequisite to system change is this mindset change.
Correct.
What needs to happen there, and how does that happen?
Yeah, correct. And the question in our book, we just wrote this book, Net Positive, which we want to start a movement of what good looks like and go well beyond net zero that we heard about this morning. Nothing bad about it, but it's just simply not enough anymore. World Overshoot Day last year was July 29th, which is the day that we use up more resources than the world can be.
Earth Overshoot Day.
Yeah, so every day after that, we're actually stealing from future generations. I don't want to be part of that. So if we don't think restorative, reparative, regenerative, which we call net positive, and get beyond net zero, which is a noble goal as an interim goal, but that's not the end goal. It's like going to the moon and saying halfway I turn back. It's just not enough. We have to do the real thing, and that requires obviously to look at it more holistically, including issues of equality or inclusion or racial dimensions, biodiversity protection. It's much broader than just the climate change, which often gets simply associated with carbon emission. This is a bigger issue. So where do you start? In fact, the end of the day, you start with listening. The famous thing that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. But listen to all your stakeholders. Listen to the people that you're really trying to serve. Understand what the real issues are out there. And then finding out what you as a company can really make a difference on to make it better. And unfortunately, in the rat race that we're in, too few people do that. If you see the gap between what employees think in a company about their leaders as being moral leaders, only 17% of people in the US think that their CEOs are moral leaders. A CEO who says we make all these commitments, less than half of the employees say these commitments are really being put into practice. So it starts with your own inner core. If you don't have a strong inner core, you won't be able to develop this more resilient outer core that we're talking about.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Net Positive. That's the title of your book, as you said, that you did co-wrote with our friend Andrew Winston. It's out. It's a great book. And there's... That's why I asked Andrew. I'd never be able to do this. Yeah, right. But I'm a little concerned that, people are saying, well, net positive, I love the concept. Who doesn't want to be net positive? But I'm still struggling with just net zero. Yeah. And as we all know, there's been a lot of pushback on that in the world, and from folks who may rightfully and maybe have some criticism that is warranted and some that's definitely not. Yeah. How do we make that leap if you're still struggling with net zero, or is it a linear kind of thing? You get to net zero and then net positive?
Yeah, unfortunately it's not linear because we have an exponential problem, but we're thinking linear. So part of the problem is that between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees there's a bigger difference than a half a degree, if you understand what I'm saying. But as I said, net zero is, I think that concept will pretty quickly be obsoleted, if I may be honest. The more companies make these commitments for 2060 or 2050 and bank on carbon capture storage or some other things that they can come up with so that they don't have to really fulfill their own obligations, I mean, we have a problem. And I think society just simply doesn't accept it anymore. If you look at the top publicly listed companies in the world, less than 10% has really made commitments for science-based targets by 2050, and of that group, only 8% has targets for 2030 that are really, backed up by concrete plans. So we can talk to ourselves in these echo chambers, but it doesn't work. And it is because we define good enough in a way that isn't sufficient. That's how I look at it. So in a world that has overshot its planetary boundaries, just thinking that we can be net zero is the wrong target. And what we're trying to do with this book is get people to think about net positive. And sure, you have to go through different stages on the way to net positive. But if we don't think as businesses now about regenerative, we won't get there. Microsoft, going back to 1975, since they started, to take carbon out is a good starting point. PayPal or MasterCard, working very hard on financial inclusion for everybody, is a good starting point. Walmart protecting 1 million square miles of ocean, or Nestle or Unilever moving to regenerative agriculture, are good starting points. So there are elements of regenerative coming in. And frankly, we need it. Otherwise, we are still extinct as a species. Yeah. But it's not applied consistently, and it's not really fully at the core of the strategy. And what this book is trying to do is help companies really get there on that journey. Yeah.
Well, the other piece, I mean, we talked about systems change a minute ago. It's also long-term thinking, and we're generally not rewarded for long-term thinking. How do we square that circle?
That's an understatement. But yeah. But what I explain to most of the CEOs is we had over 500 factories in Unilever, but when I would make a decision, or our company make a decision to put a new factory there, it would take 6, 7, 8 years before it would pay out. Going into a country like China, it might take 15 years to pay out. If we invest in someone, it might take 20, 25 years to get the payout, be it a CEO candidate or whatever. So we are willing to make these longer term choices. And as we make these longer term choices, by definition, we are willing to deal with these trade-offs. This is what CEOs do, and they get very well paid for it to do that. So why not enter into that also in the equation? Just the simple things that give you a guarantee or a better chance to exist in the future, that have to deal with the future of humanity. So increasingly, these ESG factors that are coming in certainly have added another dimension to the role of a CEO and the responsibilities for which he or she is held accountable. But they are very important decisions to take into your choice set if you want to be around for the longer term. Yeah. This is where we need to get them to understand that.
I want to get to a question from Sidebar in a second. But you said something to me, I guess yesterday, we were talking about, it's not about what's perfect, it's about what's realistic. And yet we're talking about net positive, which seems perfect, or at least idealistic in a certain kind of way. Again, it's another sort of like, how do we think about being realistic, not perfect, and yet heading in the direction of net positive?
Well, it starts with by aligning on what good looks like. If you wrongly define what good looks like, and you might have the ladder against the wrong wall, or you might chase the wrong objectives. What good looks like now in this world is really that we think regenerative, restorative, which frankly is not something that is new to us. Nature is by its design regenerative. This whole notion of waste has been invented by human beings. It didn't exist before. So if we invented waste, we can also uninvent waste. The fact that we call it waste and think it's normal is already a bizarre notion to me, you see. So, for example, in Unilever, I said to at that time, our director of product supply, I said, all of our factories should be zero waste to landfill. And he says, that's impossible, or it's going to cost you a lot of money. I said, fine, but what will it take? Just tell me what it will take. I will take a long time. I said, take 5 years to do it, but let me know what it takes to redesign, and obviously a lot of it is in the design stage. We achieved in 3 years' time, we achieved all of our factories being zero waste to landfill. A lot of it we could upcycle.
Yeah.
Sorry. We could upcycle. A lot of it was in the design that we could just cut. But what we found was interesting. Not only were we saving hundreds of millions, which because waste doesn't get a good return nowadays. So not only did we save hundreds of millions, but we saw the factory being better in quality. We saw the engagement of the employees go up. We saw the customer service going up. So if you think in these things as a total system, then a lot more things make sense than if you just think in these little silos in terms of trying to find this solution. So what you can do, to your previous question, is be much more system thinkers. I didn't want to have contingent labor on the payroll because, my basic starting point is always, how do you want to be treated? In the way, how do you treat others? How do you want to live with the planet in the way, how you should treat it? So why should these people be there as temporaries on your payroll so you can get away with a lot of things that we shouldn't get away with? This Uberization of society is really a cancer that we should deal with. So we said all the contingent labor in Pakistan and India that were all working in these tea factories and whatever, we make them permanent employees. Oh, that's way too much money. We can never survive. We can never compete. But we make them permanent employees. If you cannot compete that way, you shouldn't be in that business, in my opinion. So we make them permanent employees. No, but what you see is a different thing. We make them permanent employees, but you don't have any more attrition. You have higher productivity. If you start thinking in systems, when Uber Eats or whatever, Deliveroo, this was in the UK, Deliveroo came out, and the guys came to my office, because unfortunately they were all guys at that time, but they said, we can have $1 billion more in turnover in ice cream, because everybody we could now call, and within 2 minutes we'll eat a wonderful Magnum here or a Ben & Jerry's. So my only question is, how much do these people get paid? These people weren't even paid a living wage for London. And then, meanwhile, being in traffic and being exposed to all the risks that nobody seems to care about, I don't want to sell my ice cream that way. So we said to Deliveroo, you go to London living wage if you want to do business with us. They did, to their credit. So this is what Net Positive is all about, is use your size and scale to change the system around you. We were the first ones issuing green bonds, not to dwell on. But I didn't need any green bonds because we were well above the qualifications of green bonds. But the banks were eager to deal with Unilever. So I said, the only way you can deal with us is if you stop financing this illegal deforestation that's going on in the world. So you use your size and scale to drive this broader systems change. That's how we need to think about things. I call it the multiplier effect. My socks is for water. I buy these socks, some money goes to water. They call it conscious steps. I feel happier, I still need my socks, but it's a multiplier effect. That's how we should be living our lives.
I've got all kinds of sock jokes in my head, and I'm just going to skip right there because right now.
My watch is for the blind, by the way. So that's a different story. But but anything you can do should have a bigger ripple effect than just taking care of your own.
Well, I have to take care of my own because we are out of time. Sorry we didn't get to sidebar, but we're going to continue this conversation in about later on this afternoon at a breakout session that Paul and I are going to be doing called Leading from the Middle, which I'm very much looking forward to. So we'll have an hour to talk, including talking with
management and companies. You have to quantify that.
Yes, not to
get confused with other things.
Okay, I'm not even sure where that. I don't want to touch that one. But thank you for being this voice in this community that is so loud and clear, and speaking to the people who need to be hearing this at the global level, at the CEO level. It's a critical thing. Your voice in this, I can't tell you how much this means to us to have that in this world, and how much it helps make the room we need to get the work done. I really appreciate your being here and look forward to the conversation this afternoon. Please join me in thanking Paul Polman.